Hello, everyone. I am Elliot Mizrahi. I'm Vice President for Communications and Content at Page, and I'm so happy to welcome you to today's webinar, which we've titled Communicating Through Transformation. Today's webinar is part of a Page program that we're conducting as part of Page Patrons. Knowing that there are so many CommTech solutions out there, we've developed Page Patrons as a program to showcase the best of them and to help members learn about what they can do. Our webinar today is made possible with support from our Page patron, Airtable, which is an app platform that enables teams to build workflows that modernize their business processes. As Page continues its exploration of CommTech, what's become clear is that technology isn't the whole story. CommTech is also about new ways of working, ways that allow for greater speed and agility, coordination and optimization, and also ultimately increase impact. So today's conversation is focused on how Airtable sits at that intersection between tools and those new ways of working. Their head of global communications is Matt Steinfeld. He's with us today. He'll be leading the conversation along with Stephanie Hartgrove, who is the Vice President of Global Communications at Baker Hughes, and also a former participant in our Future Leaders Experience program. With that, I am very excited to hand it off to Stephanie to get us kicked off. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll just start by setting the scene for our transformation at Baker Hughes. We're an energy technology company, and you can see the fine print here. We have thousands of employees and customers and operations in 120 countries around the world. And for a comms team, what that means is that we have a wide variety of audiences that we need to engage on our transformation journey. I'll start by quickly just walking you through the chronology of our transformation so that you can get a feel for the environment that the communications team has been operating in. Our journey as a company began in 2019 when GE decided to spin off its oil and gas business to create a separate standalone company by merging with Baker Hughes. In our first rebrand, the team set about removing the GE monogram and positioned BHGE as the world's first and only full stream oil and gas company. Then fast forward a few months and GE's CEO had changed. What that meant was that the new CEO was far less interested in owning an oil and gas company, and they quickly announced their intent to sell down their interest in BHGE. So the integration work that had begun was stalled. We had literally said to legacy Baker Hughes employees, welcome to the GE family. And all of our value propositions for our customers and employees had to change. And then on top of that, we had to unplug from hundreds of systems and process and people dependencies on GE. And at the same time, we set about our second rebrand in 2 years. We became Baker Hughes, an energy technology company. And right now we are doubling down on figuring out how to transform our portfolio and our offerings and our culture to better meet the demands of what is a very changing energy landscape. And then on top of all this, I think we all know that the communications discipline in and of itself is being disrupted with this onset of CommTech tools. So it's certainly a complex environment for a communicator at our company. And now I'll just walk quickly through some of the things that we've learned on this journey before we jump into Airtable, which definitely helped us along this process. I expect many of these things will be familiar to all of you. We are definitely not the only company that is transforming today. First, I would say that in a transformation, the volume of communications can become white noise. Our audiences have limited capacity to internalize what is happening. And that means that we, as a comms team, need to take steps, not just to contribute to the noise with our content, but to go after it and to minimize audiences. Even still, what we communicated did not always land. And so we had to start to experiment with new kinds of content that could cut through the noise. Today, we're going to be talking about operations, but it would be also really exciting to talk about content and learnings through this transformation that we've all been through in the pandemic. Next, I know that I'm not alone when I say that nothing we do is just comms. We are conveners of business discussions. We are collaborators, and I think that's more important than ever in the context of change. And then there's the fact that because of where we sit as communicators, we often are put in a position to have to challenge not just comms requests, but business initiatives. My CEO said to me once that I must feel like I'm playing the carnival game whack-a-mole all day long. And honestly, he wasn't too far off because we're constantly pushing back and having to bring teams together when we can see, but they cannot see that they are overlapping in their priorities and sometimes their initiatives. And then the last thing before we go into the tool is that, what we learned is that we could not go through this transformation without taking advantage of these new communications CommTech tools that we have at our disposal today. As a leader on a team, I'm really hyper focused on this, not because I care so much about operations, but because I learned that the more time we spend on what I call the work around the work, meetings about what's happening and who's doing what and PowerPoint gymnastics, the less time we're spending on storytelling and the creative kind of work that got us into all of this in the first place. So that's why tools like Airtable are really lifesavers, because they bring us back to what we want to work on and where we can really have impact. So I'm sure by now you're probably interested in knowing what it is and how we began. For us, it started with just the need for a communications calendar. My role at the start of the integration was very external focused and with emphasis on commercial and customer communications. At around the time of the GE separation, my remit expanded to include enterprise level employee communications. And all that coincided with a ton of new content and information that need to be shared and changed to manage. And so the first thing that our Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, Russell Wilkerson, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, the first thing he said to me was, we need a calendar, get a calendar so that we can see what is happening and then talk about all of our comms plans. So I stumbled on Airtable just in a Google search, and I, got nerdy one evening and messed around and learned the tool, and I created a calendar. And that was a really simple calendar that night, but the next day we were able to segment our communications by business unit and by audience and tagging things to spokespeople. I shared it with a few people on the team and it spread like wildfire. It was crazy because, in the past, when you introduce a new tool into our function, at least, Becky Edwards, who's with us today, will know that it takes a lot to get people on board. And that did not happen with Airtable. We kept waiting for it to not work and for something to stop it, and it didn't happen. And so now you can see some of the other use cases that we've moved into. But I think that the best way to bring all this to life is really to show you Airtable. And so now I'll hand back over to the Airtable team to talk us through and actually give us a demo of the tool.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Stephanie, and hi, everybody. The process you just heard from Stephanie is actually a really helpful way of describing how most teams onboard with Airtable. And the reason is we really started this company with a simple idea, which is that you as the customer, as the team, are going to know far more about how your organization works, how you operate, the good, the bad, the ugly, far better than we do, or any technology company for that matter. And so there are three things that are really important to us when we set out to kind of build this product for communications teams in particular. One is we want to make sure it's really easy to get started quickly. And so what you heard from Stephanie is within the span of an evening, she had built a prototype of a calendar that she could start experimenting with, tinkering with, socializing with others without the need for a really in-depth instruction manual or a major procurement contract with your IT department. And again, it may be different, depending on the team. For Stephanie, that was a calendar, right? And over time, you're able to add more features and functionality. You might start with a calendar, but over time, you want to track tasks for your creative team or your PR agency based on what's in that calendar, right? You might want to integrate your media list to sort of use that as a CRM tool and really understand how your team's engaging with folks in the media. You might want to keep tabs on your budget and be able to connect that back to the items in your calendar. And so it's really important to have that in one place for most teams. And then really the last piece is you need to be able to adapt. So Stephanie talked about an extreme case of a really dramatic change within the span of 2 years. But as we all know, every day there is some type of change that we have to deal with. And so, we've built Airtable so that it can adapt with your team as you go. You don't have to go back and rebuild from scratch or hire a consultant to come in and clean everything up when there's a change. It's something that you as the end user of the product should be able to do. And so the question is, okay, how do we do this? What should I expect when I log into Airtable? If you strip away all of my messaging and spin, Airtable is a database, right? And databases are really the backbone of every app, every piece of software that we use for work, for play, for home, whatever, right? And what we've done differently here is really try to make the act of building and managing a database much more accessible to, frankly, someone like me who's never had a computer science class. I know nothing about coding. I have a liberal arts degree, and I'm not going to tell you what my GPA was, but I'm able to use Airtable, right? And as we know, as communications professionals, there are some of us who have that engineering background. The vast majority of us don't, right? And so what we've been able to do is build something that when you come on and get on board, you're in complete control of like how you're building this system for your team, right? You decide what types of data you want to track, whether that's metrics, dates for a calendar, copy for your blog, images, whatever it is, and be able to link those items together as your team needs, right? We're also allowing you to integrate with your existing tools, right? We know we're not the first kid on the block here. So if you have social media listening tools and want to pipe those metrics in, you have a way to do that. If you want to use this to automate some of your team interactions, like gathering agenda items for meetings or sending out reminders via Slack or email, we also offer the ability to do that as well. And along the way, teams are creating like a single source of truth, right, that they're able to operate from. But as we all know, even within one team inside of a company, people work differently, right? They need different kinds of information to do their jobs. Some may be more data-driven, some may be more creative and visual. And so what we've done is create tools that allow those teams to work the way they want, but without the need to make copies of their data or create silos. I think we've all been on emails where we're like trying to figure out, is this the final version, draft 2, draft 3, right? And so having that single source of truth that's like reliable and always up to date really eliminates the need for those version control issues that we all encounter. And so obviously, what we're going to talk about today is how this worked for Stephanie and for Baker Hughes specifically. We've built a very simplified version of Baker Hughes base. They've built a really incredible system. I've often found it's easiest to start with just like a little bit of a window, not to overwhelm folks. And so Cody from our team is going to walk you through a version of how that works. But before he does that, I thought it'd be helpful if Stephanie could just talk a little bit about what you're about to see and how her team uses this application.
Sure. I think this page just sums up overall what Airtable does for us. It is a single place for not just the sharing of our communications activities, but the planning of them. So we use it for project management, and also, then making our plans visible to others in the company. It's a unified calendar, and we are able to avoid having to scramble when somebody asks us for an update. And by being able to filter and show people what they need to see, or to work in views of our projects that even members of the team want to see. Definitely easier if somebody just shows you rather than me trying to explain it. I'll hand over to you, Cody.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Matt. Like they said, I'm going to jump into a really simplified example of the Baker Hughes demo base, or of the comms base. And we call a base, that's the name for this database that you're looking at here. And I'll do a quick overview before we jump into the actual workflows. But what you're looking at here is several different tables that each track something different that you want to gather context around. So we've got the comms calendars, we've got which track all of the activities around specific communications. We've got campaigns that actually group up all of those activities and link them back to the calendars. All the channels that your team can be working on. We can track any type of really object that's important to your company. So I'm going to start by just showing you how you add some information to Airtable, and it's really simple. It works. It's a familiar interface, feels like a spreadsheet, but it is much more powerful. And instead of typing everything in, I'm actually just going to paste in a row. But basically, we're tracking all kinds of different data that's relevant to these activities. We've got the name of the activity, the channel that it's on with a lookup of what audience it's actually supporting. It's linked directly to the campaign. You've got start and end dates, the responsible business unit, anything that's important to you to be tracking about this data. And what's really amazing about this is that you can actually create easy ways to gather this information. So we know that it's important to structure it, but if you want to make it so that it's really easy for anybody on your team to submit this information, you can do what's called creating a form view. So I'll create a quick form view here. So just with that one click, you can actually create this form. And now this is, you can open this and you can share this with anybody on your team who you want to actually capture this information from. So I'm actually going to just drop this in the chat if anybody wants to try it. Well, this is always dangerous. Let's see. Cool. So you should have seen that come up in the chat. And if anybody does want to submit any information, it'll populate in real time into this grid view. And yeah, so that's one really easy way to just capture information from across the organization. So having this all in one place is super helpful to navigate any conflicts in timing, or to get any information on how any of this actually affects your work. So what's great is once it's all here, you can really filter and look at this information in any way that makes sense for your team. So if we wanted to sort this by start date, so we can get a list of all of the upcoming calendar events, you could do that really easily. Maybe it's time to prep a specific spokesperson, so you want to filter only down to individual. Sorry, let's filter. Only down to individual spokespeople. So let's say that we want to filter down to just the COO's events. So all of those will populate really easily. Or let's say that we want to evaluate our entire team's bandwidth. We can look at the comms owner, and let's look at Alvin's, and we can see all of the things that Alvin's working on. So if we need to shift some work to somebody else or view capacity, we can really easily. Or lastly, maybe want to group these by all of our channels so that we can get visibility across all of the channels that we are supporting. So that's just one simple, it's a pretty simple concept, but you can view data in really powerful ways. And this is just the grid view. And one of the ways that Stephanie told us that she's saved a ton of time is by using those calendar views. And here we've actually created just 4 simple ones. We've got 4 that are dedicated to specific business units. And these individual calendars are super useful for, the CEO can pull up a calendar of all of their relevant speaking events. And this can be bookmarked and synced to an external calendar if needed as well. And Stephanie, how many calendars were you saying that you had created?
We have something like 40 different views of the calendars. And what that means is that everybody can input content and plans on their own terms. So our HR communications leader, as an example, wants to have an HR comms calendar in front of her when she's doing her planning. And so she has bookmarked a view that is just HR comms, and she adds her content to it. And that's the view that she shares with the head chief HR officer. But because these things are connected, what she does in her view also shows up in the broader corporate level view that shows everything. So our teams can bounce around and look at deep dives on, communications plans by function or by business unit or by audience or by, comms owner without having to recreate different calendar views in PowerPoint. And that has saved us like an insane amount of time.
That's awesome. And we'll actually jump into the kind of that global calendar view in a minute. But before we do that, I wanted to walk through, because you're not just viewing any of the activities that are going on. You're running the entire planning process out of Airtable also. So what Baker Hughes has done is actually created all these rich campaign views. And again, this is the same data, just visualized in a different way. So for example, we've got the Gantt view, and this Gantt view allows teams to really look at this like timeline view of an entire project or multiple projects across the month or across the quarter or across the year. And it really lets teams save time on the entire planning process. Some teams have told us this has kind of eliminated the need for some status checks and lets them focus on the higher impact work. So let's scroll back up and let's look at that actual global calendar view that we were talking about before. So here you see kind of the aggregate of all those individuals' calendars, all of the items that were on that original grid list, because they have a start and end date, they can appear on this calendar view, again, easily synced to an external calendar, or your executives can just bookmark this top URL and always come back to this calendar really easily. So one more view that I wanted to show is this gallery view. This is a highly visual view that a lot of teams use to really create a visual representation of the teams, all of the communications going on. So Baker Hughes uses this as an asset library, so teams can come in and they can attach the comms after they've gone out, and teams can repurpose these and localize the assets for their own needs. And some teams have told us that this really eliminates the needs for a separate digital asset management system. So super powerful to a lot of teams. Awesome. So I'm going to pause right there, and that's getting all of your data into Airtable and starting the planning process. But once it's all there, and you have this structured data, it's it goes beyond minimizing that work about work, and you can really layer on additional insights to take things further. So for example, if as a comms leader, you want to look at how your team performed over the last quarter, you might want to layer in metrics from a CommTech tool like Meltwater or Banana Tag, or any of the CommTech tools that you all are using with your teams. And that can be done in a few different ways. And I'm going to show you, first let's just create let's create a new view just for our metrics. And again, this is all the same data. We're just going to visualize it in a different way. So for this view, let's hide everything except for the activity. And let's create a new field called, actually, let's call it audience size. And let's do a number field. And I'm sure you saw we have a lot of different rich field types. So you can use this for whatever kind of data you're trying to get. Oops, I guess I already have an audience size field. So let's just turn that on. So we've got our audience size field right here. And we can go ahead and import data. So you can import via CSV. You could connect this to an API and dynamically pull it in real time, or just manually enter it. But this is great. You can see there's the CSV import app. It'll update 20 records with these audience sizes. These are just kind of dummy data. But you can see this updated right there. So we augmented that. But what makes this really powerful, and you can take it to the next level, is you can start installing and creating dashboards to report on this data in a highly visual way. So let's say that we want a metrics dashboard here. We have this marketplace full of a bunch of different apps, pivot tables, just really anything you need to create rich dashboards. So we can add a chart. Let's just add a simple bar chart for this example. We select our table, the view, the metrics view. Let's say that we want to report on that audience size that we selected before. And now you can see we've got a bar chart that's giving us by status, but you can easily pivot this on something that's more relevant to your team. So if we want to see audience size by activity, or if because those were linked up to that campaigns table, we can see audience size broken down by campaign. And these are all fully interactive. You can drill into the individual records that are driving that information. So super powerful way to visualize how your team is really impacting the rest of the organization. So that was just a simplified view. You saw a simple example. And this is just kind of the foundation that Baker Hughes got started with. And bringing everybody into one place, being able to visualize metrics. And yeah, Stephanie's team has really taken it a lot further than this, but this is what we wanted to show you from the simplified comms example. So thanks, and I'll throw it back to Stephanie.
Thank you, Cody. The next page just sort of sums up overall the impact that this has had on our team. As I said earlier, we have more headspace for creativity. When a communicator is making their own plans, they can see everybody else's plans. So we're no longer meeting about who's got what and what is happening when. The custom views Cody walked through means that we are no longer making PowerPoints to satisfy big asks from leaders, while at the same time we're we're trying to roll out a massive campaign. You can do that in the click of a button and focus on, the important stuff. Also, we're no longer starting things from scratch. So we looked at the calendar base, but we have a lot of other template bases that have been built. So anytime a communicator starts to plan an event or, an internal all hands meeting or, a social campaign, they have a base that's auto-populated, and it's an exercise of filling in the blanks in the way that we work rather than needing to start from the beginning. We're also able to have far more strategic conversations with the CEO and his executive leadership team, thanks to this tool. Finally, we are, sorry, the slide disappeared on me. We're able to better demonstrate the impact of our communications through these dashboards. And these are dashboards that are created to show the impact on business objectives, not the reach of our communications with comms tactics. I don't think very many people really care about the number of social media impressions we have. They care more about the impact of the campaign overall on what the company is trying to achieve. And so that's an example of what Airtable has been able to do for us. The slide that you're looking at now is just an example of a reporting dashboard of a campaign. You can see, all of the outgoing comms and then the insights we were able to draw to inform our future campaign planning. And if you go back one slide, this is an example of the conversations with the CEO. So we're in the middle, as I said, of a cultural transformation. So the top is the CEO's priorities from a culture standpoint. And then, I was able to show him, this is what you are trying to achieve at the big picture level for the company with our culture. Now we're going to drill into, this line item here, where we are introducing new behaviors underpinning our company values. And then the two charts you see at the bottom on the left side, that is a narrative arc. So we said to him, here's what we're saying to the executive leadership team and to managers and influencers, and then to all employees. And then the calendar on the right is the, the tactical plan. Here's what we're saying, and here's where we're saying it. And then we can drill into exactly what we needed from him in the context of all that. And so, this allows him to better focus in on what we need from him and to see where individual tactics that we're talking to him about fit into the broader big picture of what the company is trying to achieve. And so I know we have, spent a lot of time talking at you. I look forward to now moving into the discussion.
Thank you both so much. I started out as the moderator of this webinar, but now I think I'm like a full-on fan of Airtable. Stephanie, let's stick with you just to start the Q&A here. You mentioned that you started out with this calendar and it caught on like wildfire. And I'm struck as we listen to this at just the diversity of features that are in this platform. Can you talk about the ones that your team seems to be capitalizing the most and the impact that it's having on efficiency and impact?
Sure. So the reason it spread like wildfire, I think, was two things. One, it was super simple. And two, it wasn't a new ask from corporate of the team out in the businesses in the regions. It wasn't an exercise of saying, hey guys, we have a new way for you to send us what we need to know in the middle. Instead, it was, hey guys, we know you are struggling to plan your communications in your business. Here's something that we can give you to better do that digitally, and it's super easy. And the benefit that we got is when they did that, we could see, what they were doing and they could see what we were doing. And so we had to not talk less, like this doesn't remove the need for human interaction. It has just changed the tone of our conversations, because when we meet, we're not going around the horn to talk about who's doing what, like what's the social plan for this campaign and the marketing plan and the, et cetera. Instead, we're saying, okay, we all see the plan. Where can we be more strategic? Where are things overlapping? And at the end of the day, it has saved us a lot of energy and time and made us smarter in our planning and decision making. There are tons of features that we didn't see here, like the form view we use in all of our internal communications for people to submit questions, and that way in advance. And that way we can, add a column to assign them to spokespeople and then add the messaging. And, it has been a really very valuable feature. The dashboards we're just starting to experiment with. The great thing about Airtable is there's training at your disposal. So if you want to dig deeper, it's all accessible on demand.
Very cool. Matt, one thing I wanted to ask you, in the demo that Cody was giving, I saw in the upper right, there was an automations option. And you mentioned it in your overview as well, that you can automate things like collecting items for agendas and things like that. Can you just share a little bit more about the automation features?
Yeah, definitely. So, and this is, a set of features we rolled out late last year, and it's been really popular with folks who are trying to kind of eliminate some of the more repetitive, busy parts of, the busy work parts of our jobs, right? And like the rest of Airtable, there's sort of a full spectrum, right? We offer you some very easy options that you can kind of plug and play, even if you have no technical background. And it follows the same kind of if blank, then blank, right? So if a record is created, you can automate that an email is sent to your creative team to let them know that there's a new task, right? Or if there's a meeting coming up, you can program a reminder to tell people to submit their agenda items, right? Things that like humans have had to do for decades, like being able to just program this very easily. But there's also even like more advanced capabilities. So if there are members on your team who have a little bit of coding skills, or you can kind of pull in an IT friend to kind of help build even more complex kind of automations into the system, where you're maybe communicating between Airtable and existing services that you have, like Salesforce or Jira, a huge suite of options that can be done there. And so it's an area where we're seeing a lot of like creativity, right? People using these automations in ways that we didn't even intend when we rolled them out, which has been really, really fun to see.
My mind is racing with all the ways that this type of a tool can save everybody time. So it's very, very powerful. I'm going to go to some of the questions because they're starting to come in the chat here. Matt Grimison, rather than read your question, I thought I'd invite you to come off mute and ask.
Sure thing. Thanks a lot. So yeah, we're actually in the build process with Airtable right now. So I'm very interested to know how you go from the conceptual to actually using it on a daily basis. We're just wondering, we're starting with, a couple of limited things like you did, but I'm wondering, once it did that spreading, what did you end up using it for? Is it everything you do? Is it some better for some tasks than others? How's that translating?
I would say, obviously it's not a communications channel. So we still have the traditional, intranet and other ways of communicating, but any planning work across any of our teams for, the operations side of what we do all happens in Airtable. In internal and external and crisis and social and, commercial, all of that is now happening in Airtable.
Thanks so much. Amanda Bledsoe, so you've got a question as well, if you'd like to come off mute. Just remind us who you're with, please.
Yes, hi, I'm with Young Brands, and I'm losing my voice a little bit, so sorry about that. It's good to see you all today. I was just curious what kind of integrations, a couple of them mentioned with Meltwater and Jira and things, but what integrations have you all put into place, and has it been able to like eliminate some other tools? Because, we hear a lot, it's like we have all things everywhere, and even with us, we are a Microsoft house, and so we're struggling to get everybody using all the Office 365 tools. So can you just talk a little bit about that, or some of the specific efficiencies?
Sure. So we have not actually done a lot of integrations. That's kind of the phase we are in our journey. And we just posted a role focused on optimizing Airtable for corporate affairs. And also we've been in a position where now as communicators, we're realizing we have this tool that can solve business challenges that extend beyond comms. And so we find ourselves being asked to create these apps to solve business problems just because we can. And we need somebody on the operations side to better coordinate the handoff of Airtable work to other functions like HR and finance, et cetera. We are also going to ask that Airtable platform manager on our team to drive the focus on all the integration. So we plan to take in and integrate with all of our measurement tools. We have Unily, where it has, powerful metrics from an internal communication standpoint. We also use Banana Tag and Meltwater. And the problem is you can tell a siloed story with the data that comes in through each one of those tools. We're going to dump all that data into Airtable so that we can spin up one of those dashboards and talk about a cohesive campaign impact. We haven't done it yet.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Analytics was one that I was specifically wondering about, because we, like you said, we have some siloed measurement and tracking, and we're currently working with our data sciences team to put everything into Domo, which is a tool that they've purchased. So I was curious if there's potential integration there too.
I don't know specifically about Domo. Matt, do you know if there's an integration?
Yeah, we don't offer a native integration with Domo, but certainly we have an API that essentially, particularly if you have some data science help, you can integrate with pretty much any tool. And since you mentioned Microsoft, I'd also just add, like, we do integrate with Teams and SharePoints. We have a lot of folks who are, and I think Cody actually references a lot of folks who are syncing the calendars that they create in Airtable with their sort of enterprise-wide Outlook deployment, right? So those, so that information's pushed to all employees. If you want to organize team meetings and agendas and things over Teams, the ability to do that. What I'll do is, since they're just drop a link in the chat here where you can just read about some of those integrations. But as I said, even for ones that aren't listed there, if you have some custom help, you can really build in whatever integration works best for your team.
Rich Jernstedt has a question.
Hey, thanks, Elliot. So thank you, all of you, for this has been really, really terrific. But my question was partly answered just after I submitted, Stephanie, when you said that Airtable makes tutorial sessions available to people, but I don't code either. So say I joined your staff, how would you bring me up to speed, and how long would it take for me to understand all of this and use it appropriately?
Sure. So, from a governance standpoint, there are certain things that all communicators have to do in Airtable because we all need the visibility of what's going on, right? And so to get someone to the point where they can add their communications plans to the tool, in the calendar that we just showed the demo of, that takes less than 30 minutes. We sit down and we, get you a license, and then we show you what to click on, and it's like filling in a row in an Excel file, or filling in the form. And we give them both, and they can just drop it in and it's instantaneous. To become a power user, I think it's really about just getting in and kicking the tires. And there are some people who, really get excited and do that, over a weekend. And then other people are, less prone to working digitally overall. And so they are, not power users, but they're still using it where it adds value to them and where they need to for us in the center.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, anything to add just in terms of the typical kind of client onboarding?
No, I think Stephanie captured. Look, I think this is something that we're always trying to do better at, right? Because I think everybody comes to Airtable with their own level of experience. Some people have operated in Excel and know really advanced stuff and how to build a spreadsheet, or they know Access and can build a database. And there's some folks who might just have never used these tools. And so one of the things we're always trying to invest in is educational resources. And Stephanie talked about this a little bit, educational resources that are really geared towards where a specific customer is in their journey, right? If they're just getting started, making sure that we've got resources to take those first steps. When you're ready to try out some of the more advanced features, making sure we've got videos, webinars, et cetera. So I think it's something we're always trying to do a better job of as more folks come onto the service.
Great. Kira Wittens with Flex. Kira, would you like to come off mute?
Thanks, Elliot. I'm gonna piggyback a couple of questions. So one was, if you could talk a little bit more around how you've either been able to integrate or eliminate a digital asset management tool, and and maybe just clarify how I should be thinking about this. So should I be thinking about Airtable as more of a kind of a project management master scheduling application that then would integrate in my content management, digital asset management, and metrics tools? Or does it also serve as digital asset management, content management? I'm trying to understand where this would fit into our stack. Today we're doing calendaring and PowerPoint, which is ridiculous. So I'm excited about that option, but would love to just get a little bit more detail around how I should be thinking about the application?
I think the answer is yes. You can do all of those things, but the cool thing about Airtable is it's not a structured project management tool like Basecamp or the ones that you pull off the shelf that require you to modify sort of how you work to meet the way they've designed their tool. For us, you asked about digital asset management systems specifically, and because of the GE separation journey, we had a DAM system with GE, and we had to unplug from that. And there was a team, working hard to build that, but in parallel, we were trying to communicate and share assets across the function. And so we created the setup that Cody showed you, whereby for every new campaign we introduce, we create 3 views. There's the calendar view, where everybody can see what's being planned. Then there's the grid view, which is more of the project management view. So that's where you can see, sorted by date, or we do it by week, and then each communication by date. You can see the status of it and who's got it, and there's a chat feature there where you can talk to each other about it. So that view becomes where we kind of do the project management. And then we also create a gallery view, which allows people to see the communications. Basically, you drop your plan in the calendar view, and then after the thing has gone out to whatever audience, you then go back into the gallery view and attach it so everybody else can see it. So if the communicator in Singapore, wakes up, they can see the communication that had gone out the day before in another country, and steal it and localize it a little bit, and then put it out. So we find that sometimes we now have the DAM system, and it's super clunky, right? Like, you have to know how to find and search for, through thousands of assets. We still tend to use the Airtable gallery views because you can find the asset you're looking for right in the moment, because you're in the middle of running that campaign, if it makes sense.
Yeah, and this is, we didn't dwell as much on this in the demo, just given this audience, but I'd say like content management is probably one of our biggest use cases outside of communication. So we have a lot of media and entertainment companies that are actually managing their production pipeline in Airtable. So like, I'll take A&E Networks as like an example. They have built over the years their own in-house like bespoke content management system that they use, right, to track every episode of every show that's ever appeared on A&E Networks. It's incredibly like bespoke. And when they started integrating Airtable, they obviously didn't want to like recreate that whole cloth in Airtable, but they wanted to be able to make sure that the systems work together really in sync, right? And then you have other customers who may not be where A&E was, and they built something already, and they need to build it from scratch. And so as Stephanie alluded to, the database structure of Airtable allows you to kind of build it as complex as you want. And just to give you, hopefully, I'm going to pretend to be Cody for a second and just show you like an example of an asset manager that we use inside of Airtable, where we're tracking different illustrations that our creative team has created, photos, and as Stephanie said, these are really visual. You have the ability to actually tag when these have been used, and really just make it as easy as possible to access this stuff. But it's all customizable. So again, if you prefer to see it more in kind of a database view, that's something you're able to do as well.
Thanks, Matt. I see a question here from Amanda as well, that's more on the content creation side. Amanda, would you like to ask?
Yes, thanks. I was just curious, you kind of touched on putting in the items. Could you talk a little bit more in depth about where the actual like writing and drafting and then also approvals happen? Does that still happen outside of Airtable, or is it within there somehow now?
The writing for us still happens, outside of the tool, but the management of the approvals process and the production cycle of content all happens in Airtable. So basically, you drop in the fact that the plan for the outgoing communication, and the first phase in our status is in draft or under consideration, and then we have in draft, and then we have complete, and then we have distributed, and then we have the column where people attach it so others can see it, and all of that. There's a view that we actually didn't show. It's sort of what's it called, a Kanban view that it looks like little cards, and you can drag the item from one status to the next. And so everybody, the editorial leader at the center can see the status of all communications that are tied, for example, to a particular newsletter, and ensure that they're all complete, and then fed into the newsletter, or video, or whatever it is.
Okay, and sorry, I know this is very tactical, but so you would draft the whole comms plan or all the content and copy outside of the tool, and then where you would you get like copy approval also outside the tool and then put it in for draft mode, or is there a view that you
no, we do
for approvals?
It depends on the project. So for example, for social media, there are, like, our executive leadership team, they all have Airtable licenses, and some of them actually go into Airtable and review the content. We put it in front of them by attaching it into Airtable, and then they check their approval, or they provide their feedback. And so some of it happens in the tool, but for some projects, it kind of depends on how the team running whatever communication plan it is wants to do that. The tool is really flexible, though.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, typically, Amanda, like for, I would never pitch Airtable as like a replacement for Microsoft Word or Google Doc, right? Like if you're writing a long form, like press release or a blog post, like you're going to continue using those services because you can have formatting and images and lay that out, right? But once it's like ready to sort of leave your screen and go to somebody else, that is really where Airtable adds a lot of value, because as we know, like it's often hard to find those drafts, know which version it is. And as Stephanie was saying, you can, once that content is ready to review, you can attach it. If you have like a live link through Office 365 or Google Docs, you can drop that URL in the base, and it's constantly up to date. So at any point anybody wants to look at it, they know that they're looking at the latest version.
That's great, thank you.
Will Rhea is with Hess. Will, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, hey Stephanie, it's Will.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you. Hey, you made a comment about using this for crisis, and I was curious if there's anything. I mean, obviously we've talked about here about editing and drafting and things. We use Jetty as a tool, and we've started to integrate Teams to that because, of course, no one tool does everything. So I'm just curious, is there anything you're doing specifically or unique around crisis management with this tool?
Yes, we are doing, I would say, everything in crisis management now in Airtable base that a communicator responsible for managing a crisis pulls off the shelf and opens in a crisis. And that base is it's a template that's already been designed with all of the things that we know are necessary to do in a crisis. So at the very beginning, it's about gathering the facts about what and when and where and why, and whatever you can gather. Then there's the tab for the stakeholders, who is impacted, and the impact assessment happens in that tab. And then there's the communication timeline tab. So very immediately, people can go in and start saying, we know we're going to have to communicate this to this audience, and here's the distribution list that we're going to need, and all the lists, all the media lists, all of that is pre-populated. And so in a crisis, whatever can be done in advance, we're no longer pulling kind of the Bible off the shelf of like the 300 pages that happens in a workshop with HSE and legal and everybody, and then trying to study that and then apply it in PowerPoint or whatever. Instead, they can go straight into planning mode. A regional communicator who may be new to the team might be facing a crisis in Asia Pacific when people are asleep in this side of the world. They open that and they know immediately what they needed to do because the playbook is in front of them. It has been a lifesaver to us in crisis. And then separate from that, we also used it in 100 different ways through the pandemic. We tracked, for example, customer requirements for vaccinations and all kinds of things we were able to do with this tool as communicators when they were talking about potentially calling IT to build an app for whatever thing. Like we were able to just spin it up in the span of a meeting, which was really cool.
Okay,
it's like we have a new tool in our toolkit as communicators with this.
Yeah, you see the power of the integration here as you guys have talked. Yeah. Thanks.
So we've got about 7 more minutes here, still welcome questions if anybody wants to put them into the chat. Stephanie, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned working cross-functionally through Airtable as well, so outside of the comms team. And I would imagine those functions have their own kind of systems and processes for doing their own coordination, but it seems like they've taken to this as well. Can you talk about the experience of extending it or working with those teams through Airtable and how you've acculturated it?
Sure. So I start off by talking about how, you know, with this visibility we have in Airtable, we can go after the noise, right? And we were very quickly able to see that we were competing against ourselves with our communications. And we were able to, you know, kind of stop doing that and better choreograph the types of activities that we owned as comms. And I would say once we accomplished that, I could see that the machine in comms was running. And I could see, because my team, you know, I support the CEO and the head of HR and the head of commercial and communicators that are embedded in all of these leadership teams. They were also looking for ways to better synchronize, you know, their plans. And so now we're starting to use the same tools so that, you know, we can add, for example, when we talk about the culture transformation, it's not just about culture communications. It's about other programs that the company is driving from a talent and capabilities and, you know, DEI and all sorts of things. It's almost like that movie Field of Dreams, right? Like if you build it, they will come. We've built it and people can see it and they now want it. And they're asking us, can you help us build it? And I am trying to, you know, I find myself at a point where I have to remind communicators they are still communicators. And while it would be easy for them to create, you know, a culture initiatives roadmap for HR or a, you know, global KPI tracking, you know, tool or app or whatever for finance or a risk assessment program for legal, it's not really our jobs, but we can make the introduction and, you know, because of the enterprise relationship we have with Airtable, we're designing all of that for the other functions in a way that syncs with what we're doing. So we can not only see now, or at least the vision is once it's all done, we will not only be able to pull up our communications transformation timeline, we'll be able to pull up the company's transformation timeline and filter to see stuff related to comms or legal or, you know, whatever. Change management perspective, this has been really, really valuable to us.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yep, Green, would you like to ask your question?
Sure, I sure can. Hi, Stephanie. Thank you so much. This is really, this has been insightful. It's always great to see how a tool is used because it just brings it to life in a very different fashion. The question I had though is how mature were your processes before you started using Airtable? Is it something that you were building the car as you were driving down the road, or did you have fairly established processes that were really clear to see put into translation inside of a different database tool?
I love that question. I mean, we did not have established processes. We were building the car as we were driving it for sure. We were integrating two legacy communications teams and we had all done things differently. And we were needing to do new things, like new frontiers in energy means new demands on our function. And so we're all building. The great thing about Airtable is it has been sort of a forcing mechanism for us to get our act together. What I remind people is that like, a crappy process that is digitized will result in a crappy digitized process. You have to do the work to clean up the workflow in order to then digitize it in a way that works. And it's interesting because I mentioned before we've hired a girl named Leanne to lead Airtable platform management, and we chose Leanne not because she's great at the tool. We chose Leanne because she has been communicating in our network for the last 3 years, and she will be able to help the team optimize how they work, you know, sort of under the guise of let's get it in the tool, but really it's about, you know, this has been the forcing mechanism to enable us to get our processes to a point where they can be digitized and work better.
Yeah, and this is, and Nancy dropped a note in the chat here. I think like one of the things, like if you are kind of interested in applying all the stuff you've heard to your own workflow, whether it's really mature or whether it's the car is getting built as you're driving it, that's part of kind of how we get teams onboarded on the platform is really asking a lot of questions just to understand what's working for you today, what isn't, hopefully bringing some best practices to bear based on what we've heard from other teams, and then build a system that reflects kind of where you as a team want to go. Because I think the worst thing in the world is if someone's telling you like, this is how you should work, right? Without any real insight into the quirks and idiosyncrasies of your team. And let's face it, we all have them. And so it's really a collaborative process getting up and running, given that.
Thank you both. So with 2 minutes to spare, let me ask you if you each would offer a final thought or maybe a word of advice to people who are seeing kind of the rich feature set and trying to decide where and how they can get started. Matt, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the things that, as I've gotten to meet folks like Stephanie in a wide variety of companies using Airtable, like the folks who are most successful, like building with our tool, are the types of folks who are very like hands-on DIY, like constantly trying to optimize how their team, works and operates. And I can think of people in every company I've ever worked at, like you have people like that on your team, right? They may not all have the same title or be in the same level. And I think there's a lot of like latent energy, I think, in communications teams to figure out how we can operate better and have a bigger impact on the company. And I think as you're sort of evaluating tools, whether it's ours or another one, frankly, this can be a really empowering thing for folks on the teams who have that kind of mindset. And I think it's just like, it's a great culture builder, a great career growth opportunity, and something I think that's helpful to keep in mind. So.
Sure. I was kind of going to build on that. I would say I have two pieces of advice. One, it's really easy just to sign in and like experiment a little bit. And, for me, that led to what we have today. And so try it out. And, the other piece of advice I would give is that we're all senior leaders, and we could have a tendency to say, okay, I support the use of CommTech on our team and I will pay for it. And I will, encourage and drive adoption across the function. But I think what is really needed is for us to, get in and learn the language and become experts and role model, because that is when, at least I can feel the impact, and our team has really benefited from the fact that like everybody has jumped on board. It's not just enough for us as leaders to say, let's try it. We can all still learn. I can't work very well in Excel. I am not a process or really digital guru at all, but if I can do it, and as Matt said, if he can do it, I think we all can.
Great note to leave it on. We're at the top of the hour. I want to thank Stephanie for sharing all that wonderful insight, Matt for introducing us to Airtable, to the whole Airtable team for everything you've done to make this possible. And I hope you enjoyed this. We look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.